The bus screeched to a halt at the gates of Fort Benning, Georgia, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Through the smudged window, Elisa Grant caught her first glimpse of the military world she'd dreamed about since childhood. Barbed fences gleamed under the scorching sun. Soldiers marched in precise lines, and the air itself carried authority. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with an ache to prove she belonged. She slung her duffel bag over her shoulder and stepped off the bus. The first thing she heard wasn't the drill sergeant's bark, it was laughter. A group of recruits, mostly men, were whispering and grinning. One nudged the other. "Looks like the Girl Scouts are joining us," he snorted. "Hope she packed her makeup kit," another added. Elisa didn't react. She'd been through worse. Growing up on a ranch in rural Texas, she had learned early that silence spoke louder than words. Her grandfather, Jack Grant, a retired Vietnam veteran, had taught her that lesson while showing her how to aim a rifle. "Confidence is quiet," he used to say. "Noise comes from the ones who miss." She'd been just 9 years old the first time she fired a gun. It was an old Winchester, almost too heavy for her small arms. The recoil had knocked her backward, but when her grandfather saw the clean hole through the tin can, he smiled. "You've got steady hands, kiddo," he said. That moment stayed with her for life. Now, years later, she was standing on the training ground of one of the toughest bases in the U.S. Army, surrounded by men who didn't believe she deserved to be there. But she wasn't here to make them believe, she was here to prove it. That first week was brutal. The heat was unrelenting, and the training pushed every recruit to their limit. Elisa struggled to keep up during the long runs, her boots digging into the dirt, her breath ragged. Every time she faltered, the laughter followed. "Come on, Grant. You slowing down for a manicure break?" One soldier jeered. "Maybe the Army should issue her a pink rifle," another shouted. She clenched her teeth, ignoring the sting. Their words fueled her legs, not her anger. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But when it came to weapons assembly, things went worse. Her hands, though steady with a rifle, fumbled during timed drills. The weapon jammed. The instructor, Sergeant Pierce, rolled his eyes and barked. "Grant, are you building a dollhouse or a firearm? Move faster." The recruits erupted in laughter again. She could have cried that night, but she didn't. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the dismantled rifle on her knees. Her roommate, Private Emily Torres, whispered, "You shouldn't take it so hard. They'll get bored eventually." Elisa smiled faintly. "I'm counting on it," she replied. When lights went out, she didn't sleep. She stayed up under the dim glow of her flashlight, taking apart and reassembling the rifle again and again. By midnight, she could do it blindfolded. By dawn, she did it faster than the stopwatch. Training continued, and so did the ridicule. During target practice, her first few shots missed wide. A bullet landed far left of the paper target, prompting a chorus of laughter from her squadmates. "Careful, Grant. You'll shoot the sun next," someone yelled. Even Sergeant Pierce chuckled. "Grant, maybe you should stick to kitchen duty." Her cheeks burned. She adjusted her stance and fired again, closer, but still off-center. Her frustration grew, but she didn't argue. She took the punishment, the mockery, and the disbelief, all of it, and turned it into fuel. That night, when others went to bed, she sneaked back to the range. The field was silent, except for the hum of crickets and the metallic click of her rifle. The targets glowed faintly in the floodlights. She practiced until her shoulder ached and her eyes burned. Every shot she took whispered one message: "I belong here." Hour after hour, she focused on breathing steady, calm, patient. Just like Grandpa taught her. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it," she murmured to herself. "Trust your aim." Trust yourself. By sunrise, she could hit the paper dead center. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Over the next few weeks, she began to change not outwardly, but within. Her movements grew sharper, her focus stronger. The same recruits who laughed at her now whispered in confusion. "She's improving," one muttered during drills. Didn't think she had it in her. Still, the skepticism lingered. Sergeant Pierce remained cold, his tone clipped and unimpressed. "You've got a long way to go, Grant," he'd say, though there was less mockery in his voice, now more caution, as if he couldn't quite decide what to make of her. Alyssa didn't care for his approval. She wanted mastery. She wanted control. Every time she hit the range, she remembered that dusty Texas field, the old Winchester, and her grandfather's proud smile. But beneath her growing confidence, a quiet pressure built inside her. She wasn't just fighting for respect, she was fighting every stereotype that came before her. Every woman who'd been told she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or brave enough. She carried that weight every time she pulled the trigger. One day, during lunch, the tension boiled over. A recruit named Corporal Jenkins, tall and cocky, slammed his tray next to hers in the mess hall. "You think a few extra hours of practice make you a sharpshooter?" He sneered. "Out there, one mistake can get a man killed. You're not ready for that." Elisa looked up, calm and composed. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I'll take a mistake over arrogance any day." The table went silent. Jenkins didn't reply. He just glared and walked away, muttering under his breath. From that day, the laughter grew quieter. The men still doubted her, but now they watched her differently. Curiosity had replaced mockery. That evening, the sky turned orange as the sun sank behind the barracks. Alyssa stood alone on the range again, her rifle steady in her arms. She lined up her sights, exhaled slowly, and fired. The bullet struck the bullseye clean and precise. She didn't smile. She simply reloaded and fired again. Bullseye, then again, and again. By the 10th shot, she felt something shift inside her, a calm she hadn't felt since leaving home. She knew she was ready for whatever came next. A gust of wind swept across the field, carrying a faint echo of her grandfather's voice in memory. "Confidence is quiet, Alyssa. The best shooters never need to speak." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alyssa lowered her rifle, her eyes reflecting the last streak of gold light. She wasn't the same woman who had stepped off that bus weeks ago. She wasn't the rookie they mocked. She was becoming something stronger, something precise, uncheckable, and deadly accurate. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. The morning bugle ripped through the air like a siren, shaking the barracks awake. Alyssa sat up immediately, boots already beside her bed, her rifle disassembled on the floor. She'd been awake for hours, cleaning and oiling it until every part gleamed. Today was another day of weapons, training another day to prove herself, even if no one else believed she could. By the time she stepped outside, the Georgia sun was already blazing. The recruits lined up in formation, sweat glistening on their brows, rifles slung over their shoulders. Sergeant Pierce paced back and forth, his boots kicking up dust. "Today," he barked, "we see who can actually handle their weapon and who should have stayed home knitting." Several recruits chuckled, their eyes sliding toward Alyssa. She ignored them, her expression calm. The range was set. Targets gleamed in the distance white, circular and intimidating. The moment Pierce gave the signal, the sound of rifles exploded across the field. Alyssa took her stance, her feet firm, shoulders square, eyes locked. Her first shot went wide. The second wasn't much better. Behind her, laughter erupted. "Nice work, Grant. You're supposed to hit the target, not scare it." Maybe she needs glasses. Even Sergeant Pierce, couldn't suppress a smirk. You gonna waste the whole box of ammo, Private? Elisa's jaw tightened. Her finger hovered over the trigger, but she didn't shoot again. She took a deep breath and stepped back, lowering the rifle. It wasn't anger she felt, it was calculation. Every mistake was a lesson, every laugh a reminder. That night, while the others slept soundly, she returned to the range. The field was empty, moonlight spilling across the targets. She set up her gear, her breath visible in the cold air. Alone with her weapon, she could hear every heartbeat, every whisper of the wind. She loaded a single bullet, took aim, and fired. Crack, the bullet missed by an inch. She adjusted. Another shot, closer. By the fifth shot, the bullet hit dead center. A soft smile tugged at her lips. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. You don't shoot to impress, Alyssa. You shoot to understand. Once you respect the weapon, it'll respect you back. She stayed there until dawn, practicing until her hands ached and her arms trembled. The world outside slept, but Alyssa was awake building precision, one bullet at a time. The next morning, dark circles ringed her eyes, but her focus was razor sharp. During drills, she moved with quiet determination. Some of the men noticed. Most didn't care. Jenkins, the loudest of them all, sauntered over with his usual smirk. Hey, Grant, he sneered. How many targets you gonna miss today? 10? 20? She didn't answer. Jenkins leaned closer. Come on, say something. Or is the little cowgirl too scared? Alyssa slowly turned her gaze toward him. Her eyes were calm, steady, unflinching. You'll see, she said simply. He laughed. See what? A miracle? But when the next session began, something changed. Her stance was tighter, her breath steadier. The first shot hit the edge of the target, the second closer. By the fifth, she was hitting center mass consistently. The laughter stopped mid-breath. Jenkins blinked in disbelief. Beginner's luck, someone muttered. Sergeant Pierce, arms crossed, watched silently. His face gave nothing away, but for the first time, there was no mockery, just observation. Later that day, Alyssa was summoned to the armory. She entered, unsure why she'd been called. Inside, a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes stood waiting Staff Sergeant Marcus Lewis. Unlike Pierce, his presence wasn't overbearing. He spoke calmly, but his words carried weight. You're Grant, right? He asked. Yes, sir, she said, standing straight. I saw your range performance, he said. Sloppy at first, but your adjustment's impressive. You've got a natural rhythm. Reminds me of someone I trained years ago. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Thank you, sir. I'm still learning. That's good, Lewis said, walking closer. Because every real marksman is always learning. You want to improve? Yes, sir. Then show up here tonight. 2,100 hours. Quietly. And just like that, he left her standing there, bewildered. That night, Alyssa arrived at the armory as instructed. Lewis was waiting, a small flashlight clipped to his vest. He handed her a different rifle, sleeker, balanced, heavier. Meet the M110, he said. You've been using a standard M4, but I want to see how you handle precision. If you can control this, you can handle anything. She nodded, gripping the weapon. Let's start simple, he said. 200 meters. One shot. Take your time. Alyssa dropped to her knee, aligned the scope, and exhaled slowly. The night air was cold against her cheek. Her finger tightened on the trigger crack. The shot echoed. The bullet hit within an inch of the bullseye. Lewis smiled faintly. Not bad for your first try. They practiced for hours. Lewis corrected her grip, her breathing, her shoulder placement. Your biggest weakness isn't aim, It's doubt, he told her. You hesitate. Every time you second-guess yourself, your aim shifts a hair. And in this job, a hair's difference can cost lives. Elisa nodded, absorbing every word. Days turned into weeks. Under Lewis's quiet mentorship, she trained relentlessly. Her grouping tightened. Her reload speed quickened. During simulations, she was faster, calmer, more composed than anyone expected. The recruits began noticing. Did you see Grant today? One whispered. She hit 6 targets before Jenkins hit 3. Since when did she get good? The laughter was fading. Even Sergeant Pierce stopped making jokes. Instead, he started watching her closely during drills, scribbling notes on his clipboard. But not everyone was happy about her improvement. Jenkins, humiliated by her progress, decided to test her. One afternoon, during cleaning duty, he sauntered over. You think you're special now, huh? He sneered. Just because you got a few lucky shots? Elisa didn't look up. It's not luck, she said. Prove it then, he said, tossing her a challenge coin. Range, 1-on-1, tomorrow. She hesitated, then nodded. Fine. The next day, the range buzzed with anticipation. Even Pierce showed up to watch. The rules were simple. 10 targets each, same distance, best accuracy wins. Jenkins went first, hitting 7 out of 10. The men cheered, slapping his back. Beat that, he shouted. Elisa stepped forward silently. Her rifle gleamed in the sunlight. She took her position, inhaled deeply, and fired. Crack, crack, crack. 10 shots. 10 hits. Perfect. Silence. Then Sergeant Pierce muttered, almost to himself, Well, I'll be damned. Lewis, standing behind, allowed himself a small grin. Didn't I tell you? He said softly. She's got it. Elisa lowered her rifle, her expression calm. She didn't need applause. She didn't even look at Jenkins, whose face had gone pale. She simply turned, handed her weapon back to the quartermaster, and walked off the range. The whispers followed her, not of mockery this time, but of awe. That night, Elisa sat on her bunk, the barracks quiet. Emily, her roommate, smiled from across the room. You really shut them up today. Elisa smiled faintly. They'll find something new to laugh about soon. Maybe, Emily said, but not about you. For the first time since she arrived, Elisa allowed herself to exhale. She wasn't at the top, yet not even close, but she had crossed the first invisible line. She was no longer the recruit they laughed at. Now, she was the one they watched. And deep inside, a quiet fire burned. The kind that didn't flicker or fade. The kind that only grew stronger with every challenge. Elisa Grant had learned something vital that day. Respect isn't given. It's earned shot by shot. The winter wind bit through Fort Benning like a blade, whistling across the training grounds and carrying the familiar scent of gunpowder and red clay. Elisa's gloves were thin, her fingers numb, but her focus was sharp. The rifle rested snug. Against her shoulder, her cheek pressed against the cold metal. Crack, the bullet tore through the air and slammed into the center of the target. Dead center. Good grouping, said a familiar voice behind her. She lowered her rifle and turned. Staff Sergeant Marcus Lewis stood there with that same calm expression, part soldier, part teacher, all composure. His presence carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. Thank you, sir, Elisa replied, standing straight. He nodded once. You've come far in a short time. But don't let that fool you. Accuracy isn't just about aim, it's about patience, timing, and knowing when not to shoot. Elisa nodded, absorbing every word. Since that first night in the armory, Lewis had taken her under his wing. What started as extra practice sessions had turned into daily lessons on everything from rifle mechanics to combat psychology. He never praised easily, but when he did, it meant something. Later that afternoon, the unit gathered for field marksmanship drills. Sergeant Pierce barked orders, his voice echoing across the training field. Alyssa joined her squad, the same men who once couldn't stop laughing at her. Now they kept quiet. The challenge: 10 targets at varied distances, 100, 200, and 400 meters each, popping up for only a few seconds. The test was brutal, designed to simulate real combat timing. When her turn came, Alyssa took position. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to the sound of her pulse. Crack, crack. One by one, the targets fell. Each hit was crisp, efficient, and deliberate. By the 10th shot, the field was silent. 10 out of 10, the range officer called out. A silence broke into murmurs. A few of her squad mates nodded. Others just stared. Jenkins, standing a few rows behind, kicked the dirt in frustration. Sergeant Pierce stepped forward, scanning the score sheet. "Not bad, Grant," he said, voice measured. "Let's see if you can do it again tomorrow." Alyssa didn't respond. She just reloaded. That evening, as the sun dipped low, turning the sky blood orange, Alyssa met Lewis again at the private range. The two worked in rhythm, no small talk, no wasted time. He'd adjusted her stance, corrected her breathing, and even taught her about wind drift. "You ever wonder," he said between drills, "why soldiers laugh when someone new joins?" She smirked faintly. "Because they're scared someone might be better than them?" Lewis chuckled. "Exactly. Laughter's just a defense. The military's full of pride. Everyone wants to be the best shot, the strongest soldier. You walked in and didn't fit their mold. That threatened them." She lowered her rifle. "Then I'll give them something worth fearing." Lewis looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "That's the spirit." By the next week, Alyssa's reputation had begun to spread, not just in her own squad, but across the base. Recruits whispered about the woman who never missed her mark during training. In the mess hall, soldiers glanced her way with something new in their eyes, not mockery, but curiosity. Emily Torres, her roommate, grinned. "You're like a ghost story now. Everyone's talking about the girl who turned Fort Benning into a shooting gallery." Alyssa laughed softly. "Then I hope they're taking notes." "Maybe," Emily said. "Or maybe they're just realizing they underestimated the wrong person." But improvement came with pressure. The qualification test was approaching a massive event that would determine who advanced to specialized weapons units. It was every recruit's nightmare and dream rolled into one. Alyssa's squad mates trained harder than ever, their laughter replaced by grunts and competition. Jenkins, still fuming from his loss, trained obsessively. He never spoke to Alyssa again, but his glares spoke volumes. One afternoon, Pierce called for a mock trial, an unofficial pre-qualifier. It was meant to test focus under stress. Each recruit had to shoot 5 targets, while another shouted distractions in their ear. When Alyssa's turn came, Jenkins volunteered to be her distractor. As she took aim, he leaned close. "Don't mess this up, Grant," he sneered. "Wouldn't want to ruin your perfect little record." She ignored him. "You really think Lewis picked you because you're good?" he continued, voice low and venomous. "He just feels sorry for you. You're a charity case in uniform." The words sliced deep, but Alyssa didn't blink. She took a slow breath and fired. Crack, bullseye. Jenkins went silent. Another target. Crack, bullseye again. When she finished, the instructor raised his clipboard. 5 for 5. Alyssa lowered her rifle and turned slightly toward Jenkins. "Looks like I ruined your plan." He said nothing. That night, Lewis found her sitting by the range fence, cleaning her rifle. "Heard about what happened," he said. She shrugged. "He's just angry I didn't quit." Lewis nodded. "Anger's easy. Perseverance, that's rare. He paused. You ever think about what happens after this? After training? Elisa hesitated. Honestly? I don't know. I joined because I wanted to prove I could. Now I just want to see how far I can go. That's the right answer, Lewis said. Because marksmanship, it's not about ego. It's about clarity. Out there, you can't afford pride. Only precision. He stood, glancing at her rifle. You've got both talent and heart, Grant. That's rare. Keep that balance, and you'll go far. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Elisa felt something she hadn't in months belief. Not just in her shooting, in herself. Days turned into a blur of drills, sweat, and grit. Elisa began waking up before dawn, running miles before breakfast, pushing her endurance beyond her limits. Every missed shot became a lesson. Every ache became proof she was growing stronger. Pierce started assigning her as a range assistant, having her demonstrate stances for others. That was new and telling. The same instructor who once mocked her was now quietly acknowledging her skill. The whispers grew louder across the base. Grant's a machine. She doesn't miss. Lewis trained her personally. And with those whispers came pressure expectations that felt heavier than her rifle. One cold, rain-soaked morning, Lewis gave her one final test before the official qualification. The wind was vicious, the targets barely visible through the fog. Storms don't wait for comfort, he said. Let's see if you can shoot when everything's against you. Elisa nodded, rain dripping from her helmet. She steadied her rifle, adjusted for wind, and fired. A bullet cut through the downpour, slamming into the bullseye. Again, Lewis said. She fired another. Bullseye. Then another. The storm roared, lightning splitting the sky, but she never missed. When they finally stopped, Lewis grinned. You're ready, he said. Elisa lowered her weapon, breath heavy but steady. For what? He looked at her squarely. To prove every last one of them wrong. That night, as she lay in her bunk, the rain tapping against the window, she thought back to the first day she arrived, the laughter, the taunts, the humiliation. She remembered the sting of being doubted, the long hours alone on the range, the nights of exhaustion. And she realized something profound. All of it, every insult, every failure, had built her into the soldier she was now. Tomorrow would be the qualification test. The moment that would define whether she was just a good shot or something far greater. She closed her eyes and whispered the same words she'd heard 1,000 times in her mind. Confidence is quiet. Noise comes from the ones who miss. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Elisa Grant slept without fear. Tomorrow, she would make history one bullet at a time. The sun crept lazily over Fort Benning that morning, gilding the firing range in a pale golden hue. The air was cool, crisp, one of those mornings that whispered of both promise and dread. Every recruit knew what day it was. Qualification day. This was the test that separated the soldiers from the spectators. It determined who advanced, who got benched, and who carried the shame of failure through the rest of their training. Elisa Grant stood among the line of recruits, her helmet secured tight, rifle clean and gleaming in the morning light. The chatter around her was the usual mix of nervous laughter and overconfident bravado. Hey, Grant, one of the men called out, smirking. Try not to shoot the sky this time. The laughter that followed was sharp, familiar. It didn't sting like it once had. She'd built calluses around those taunts, layer after layer of quiet resilience. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed fixed on the range ahead, 100 yards of open ground dotted with targets waiting to be humbled. Staff Sergeant Lewis, clipboard in hand, paced behind them. This isn't a game, recruits, he barked. Your scores today determine your future in this camp. Miss too many, and you'll be cleaning latrines for the next 3 months. He stopped beside Elisa, For a brief second, their eyes met just long enough for him to give a small, nearly imperceptible nod. It wasn't encouragement. It was acknowledgement. She'd trained harder than anyone. Now was the moment to prove it. The whistle blew. The first shooter stepped forward. The crack of his rifle echoed across the range, the target barely dented. Murmurs rippled through the line. Another soldier fired a few hits, more misses. The men snickered, but the tension was palpable. Everyone knew how quickly the range humbled arrogance. Then it was Alyssa's turn. She took her position steady, silent. The weight of the rifle felt different today, not heavy, but purposeful, like an extension of her will. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm she'd trained for months to perfect. "In your own time, Recruit Grant," Sergeant Lewis said, voice steady but curious. "Begin when ready." Alyssa's finger brushed the trigger guard. The world seemed to narrow, everything fading except the small black dot at the center of her vision, the bullseye. Crack! The first shot split the morning air, dead center. The observers murmured, checking the target sheets. Crack! Second shot center again. By the third, the laughter had stopped. The fourth, fifth, and sixth followed in perfect succession, each round landing within the same tight circle. The sound of her rifle became almost rhythmic, a heartbeat made of gunfire. She was no longer just shooting. She was performing, translating patience, anger, and discipline into precision. By the 10th shot, Sergeant Lewis stopped writing on his clipboard. He simply watched. The recruits who'd mocked her the loudest leaned forward, eyes narrowing in disbelief. One of them muttered, "No way she's hitting all of them." The range instructor adjusted his binoculars, then froze. "Every single one?" he whispered. "She's hitting every single one." Alyssa ejected the final shell casing, letting it clatter to the ground with finality. Smoke drifted from the muzzle as she lowered the rifle. Her eyes stayed on the target holes clustered in the center, so tightly that the paper looked torn in a single unified wound. Silence followed. Then Sergeant Lewis called out, voice echoing across the range. "Recruit Grant score, 100%. Perfect accuracy." The silence turned to disbelief. Heads snapped toward her, whispers rising like static. "No. Way she didn't miss once? She got every damn one? Since when can she shoot like that?" Alyssa didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stepped back from the line, her expression calm. The same hands that had once trembled with self-doubt now moved with quiet assurance as she began disassembling and cleaning her rifle. Sergeant Lewis approached, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, studying her with a faint, almost proud smirk. "Looks like you've been putting in extra hours," he said under his breath. "Yes, Sergeant," she replied simply. He leaned closer. "You just made a statement none of them will forget." Behind them, the next recruit took his place, but no one was really paying attention anymore. All eyes were on Alyssa. The laughter that had haunted her for weeks was gone, replaced by something heavier, respect laced with embarrassment. When the day's scores were posted on the bulletin board that afternoon, her name stood at the top. Grant, Alyssa to 100%. Underneath, the others trailed by large margins: 95, 88, 72. A few names didn't even make the pass mark. Some recruits congratulated her awkwardly, half-heartedly. Others avoided her altogether, but none dared mock her again. Later that evening, Alyssa sat alone in the armory, cleaning her weapon under the warm glow of a hanging bulb. The rhythmic scrape of the cleaning rod against the barrel was soothing, almost meditative. She thought about her grandfather, the man who had first placed a rifle in her hands when she was 12. "Never let pride guide your aim," he told her once. "Only focus." She smiled faintly. That lesson had carried her farther than she'd ever imagined. Outside, She heard a few of the guys talking in hushed tones. "Grant's the real deal. Did you see her stance? Perfect control. Guess we were wrong about her. She didn't need to hear it. She already knew." When she stepped out into the night, the sky was streaked with stars. The air carried the faint scent of oil and gunpowder, a scent she'd grown to love. She paused, glancing back at the range where she had made her stand earlier that day. That patch of dirt, once a place of humiliation, had become the stage where she'd rewritten her story. As she walked back toward the barracks, Sergeant Lewis passed her, nodding slightly. "You did good today, Grant. Damn good." "Thank you, Sergeant," she said, her tone calm but resolute. He chuckled. "Don't thank me. You did it yourself." Alyssa continued walking, her boots striking the pavement in quiet rhythm. For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she felt something new, not just confidence, but belonging. And though tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps new doubts, one truth was unshakable. Now no one would ever laugh at her marksmanship again. Because Alyssa Grant had become exactly what she was destined to be, not just another soldier, but a symbol of precision, persistence, and poise under pressure. The sun had long dipped below the pine trees surrounding Fort Benning, and the training grounds glowed under the amber hue of floodlights. The smell of gunpowder still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with dust and sweat. Alyssa Grant stood quietly near the bulletin board, the faint hum of insects filling the night. Her name, Grant Alyssa, 100% accuracy, sat proudly at the top of the results sheet. The men who once laughed at her now glanced at the board, then at her, with something closer to awe than amusement. But Alyssa didn't linger. She tore her eyes away, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and began walking back to the barracks. For her, the day wasn't about triumph, it was about silence. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when everything finally settles into clarity. Inside the mess hall, conversations paused when she entered. The laughter that had once mocked her now hesitated, unsure. Some of the men avoided her gaze entirely. Others offered stiff nods of respect. She walked past them, collected her tray, and sat alone at a corner table, like she always did. A few minutes later, Private Jenkins, the loudest of her critics, approached her table, his usual swagger subdued. "Hey, Grant," he began awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Heard you did good out there today." Alyssa looked up from her food. "Thanks," she replied simply. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Guess we misjudged you." Her lips curved into a faint, almost knowing smile. "Guess you did." He nodded, mumbled something like, "Good job," and walked away. It was a small moment, but it meant more than any applause could. For the first time, Alyssa felt the walls around her begin to shift, not crumble, but bend. That night, she sat on her bunk, carefully dismantling her rifle. Across the room, two recruits whispered to each other. "Did you see her shots? Man, I couldn't hit that even with a scope upgrade." She didn't even flinch. Alyssa hid a small smile as she ran a cloth through the rifle barrel. All those nights under the floodlights, all the hours she spent doubting herself, second-guessing whether she belonged, it had all built to this moment. She didn't win because she wanted to prove them wrong. She won because she refused to quit. But even as the satisfaction settled in, she knew this wasn't the end of her struggle. Respect in the military wasn't given once. It had to be earned again and again. And Alyssa wasn't done proving herself. The next morning, the recruits gathered for endurance training. They ran laps around the dirt field, breath turning to steam in the chilly dawn. Alyssa kept a steady pace, her legs burning, but her mind focused. Every step was a reminder that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, unrelenting. When the drill instructor barked, "Pair up for shooting drills," Several men hesitated before looking her way. Private Lopez, a stocky soldier from Texas, raised his hand. "I'll partner with Grant," he said, surprising everyone including her. As they set up their stations, Lopez glanced at her rifle. "Mind giving me a few tips on that breathing technique you use? You barely move when you shoot." Alyssa blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever asked her for advice before. "It's all about timing your breath," she said, demonstrating. "Inhale, exhale, then squeeze the trigger at the natural pause." He followed her instructions. His first few shots were sloppy, but she patiently corrected him, adjusting his elbow, his stance, the angle of his cheek on the stock. After a few rounds, his aim improved noticeably. He grinned. "Damn, it works." "Focus does," Alyssa corrected, her tone calm. By midday, word spread. "Grant's helping Lopez improve his score," someone whispered. Soon, others came quietly to her during breaks, pretending to ask casual questions about breathing, about aiming, about composure. Alyssa never bragged, never gloated. She just helped. Even Sergeant Lewis noticed the change. One afternoon, he stopped her outside the armory. "You've been turning heads, Grant," he said. "Not just with your shooting. You're setting an example." "I'm just doing my job, Sergeant." He gave her a half-smile. "No, you're doing more than that. You're showing them what focus looks like." His words stayed with her long after he left. A week later, the unit was assigned a simulated combat exercise, a mock battlefield test designed to assess teamwork under pressure. The recruits would be split into two teams, red and blue, and sent into the forested terrain to complete a mission, retrieve the flag from the enemy's base, and return it without getting tagged by paint rounds. Alyssa's name was called for Team Blue. Jenkins, Lopez, and 3 others made up the rest. The same men who once doubted her now followed her lead instinctively. As the simulation began, the forest came alive with the sounds of movement, footsteps crunching leaves, paintballs snapping through branches. Team Blue advanced cautiously, spreading out in formation. Alyssa took point. She scanned the area, senses sharp, rifle raised. A glint of movement ahead caught her attention. Team Red Scouts, waiting in ambush. "Left flank," she whispered. 2 of them, maybe 3. The others crouched low, trusting her call without question. "Lopez, circle right and draw their fire. Jenkins, stay on my left, wait for my signal." They nodded. The moment Lopez fired, chaos erupted. Paintballs splattered against trees, shouts echoing through the woods. Alyssa fired 3 quick shots, each hitting an opposing team member squarely in the vest. Jenkins covered her flank as she advanced, precise and fearless. By the time the whistle blew to end the simulation, Team Blue had secured the flag. When the results were announced, Sergeant Lewis looked directly at her. "Team Blue, mission success. Outstanding coordination." His eyes flicked to Alyssa. "Especially from Recruit Grant. Flawless execution." Jenkins let out a breathy laugh. "Guess we picked the right leader." Alyssa shook her head modestly. "We worked together. That's what mattered." But everyone knew it was her calm, tactical leadership that had turned the tide. That evening, as the recruits gathered around the campfire, laughter and chatter filled the air again. But this time, Alyssa was part of it. Lopez nudged her shoulder. "You know, I almost didn't believe the rumors," he said. "But you're the real deal, Grant." She smiled softly. "Rumors are louder than truth sometimes." He chuckled. "Yeah, but yours ended up being true." For the first time since joining, she laughed, genuine, unguarded. Sergeant Lewis passed by, hands in his pockets, watching his unit with quiet satisfaction. His eyes lingered on Alyssa, pride flickering across his face. "Carry on, soldiers," he said, but his voice softened when he looked at her. You've earned this." As the fire crackled and the night settled in, Alyssa leaned back, staring at the stars. The noise of the camp faded into a comforting hum. She thought about how far she'd come from the girl they mocked for trembling hands to the soldier others now looked up to. This was her turning point, not the day she hit every target, but the day she realized she no longer needed to. She had already become one. The early morning air was thick with the smell of dew and oil as the recruits gathered for weapons inspection. The sun had barely crept above the horizon, but every soldier stood in formation, rifles gleaming, uniforms pressed, eyes sharp. Alyssa Grant stood at the front of her row, her posture straight, expression calm, her rifle cradled like something sacred. When Sergeant Lewis passed by her, his usual stern gaze softened. "Grant," he said, glancing over her weapon, "you could eat off this thing. Immaculate." "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied, voice even but humble. He moved on to the next recruit, but his faint smile lingered. Alyssa didn't need praise. She found satisfaction in the rhythm of discipline, the polishing, the cleaning, the repetition that turned muscle memory into mastery. Around her, something had changed. The same men who used to laugh at her now looked to her as a standard. They copied her attention to detail, her silent precision, her calm under pressure. Even Jenkins, once the loudest critic, had started calling her ma'am as a joke, but the kind of joke that carried respect. Later that morning, the recruits assembled on the field for tactical drills. The heat was rising fast, turning the Georgia air heavy and humid. Sergeant Lewis barked orders from the front, dividing them into squads for room-clearing exercises. Alyssa was assigned as lead for her unit. Jenkins, Lopez, and 2 others. "Remember," Lewis said, "a good team moves as one. You hesitate, you lose." Alyssa nodded to her squad, signaling with her hand. They entered the mock building, rifles raised, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. "Left clear," Lopez whispered. "Right clear," Jenkins followed. "Advance," Alyssa ordered quietly. Her voice was steady, unshaken by the tension of the drill. When a pop-up target appeared suddenly from behind a door, she didn't flinch. She fired once, clean between the eyes. The team froze for a second, stunned at her reflexes. "Keep moving," she said, her tone crisp. They finished the course in record time. Sergeant Lewis looked at his stopwatch and whistled. Fastest clear in the platoon. Perfect coordination. Lopez grinned, sweat dripping from his brow. "We've got the best shot in the base leading us. What did you expect?" Alyssa rolled her eyes, but smiled slightly. "Discipline over luck," she said. "That's all it is?" But deep down, she knew it wasn't just discipline. It was something she'd earned through grit, rejection, and relentless repetition. Respect once denied was now hers. That night in the barracks, laughter replaced the old tension. Jenkins was bragging about their drill time. Lopez was humming a country tune, and Alyssa, who usually stayed quiet, joined in the conversation. "Grant," Jenkins said suddenly, leaning forward, "how do you stay that calm? Even when stuff goes sideways?" Alyssa hesitated, then shrugged. "You don't think about what could go wrong. You think about what needs to happen next. Focus on the next step, not the last one." Lopez nodded. "Guess that's why you hit every target." She gave a faint smile. "Maybe, but sometimes you miss. The trick is not letting the miss define you." The room went quiet for a moment. The others looked at her not with doubt, but admiration. For the first time, she wasn't just part of the team. She was the center of it. Weeks passed, and training intensified. Live fire drills, obstacle courses, tactical simulations. Each day pushed the recruits harder. Alyssa thrived under the pressure. She didn't just perform. She led, inspired, and refined those around her. During one particularly brutal endurance march, where the recruits had to carry 50-pound packs over 12 miles. Jenkins began to lag behind. His breathing grew ragged, his steps uneven. "Leave me," he gasped. "Go on." Alyssa stopped, turning back. "Not happening," she said firmly. "We finish together." She grabbed his strap, helping redistribute the weight, pushing him to keep moving. The others followed her lead, rallying around their struggling teammate. By the time they crossed the finish line, exhausted and drenched in sweat, Sergeant Lewis stood waiting with a rare, proud smile. "Now that," he said, "is what a unit looks like." Jenkins bent over, panting, then looked up at Alyssa. "You saved my hide, Grant." She shook her head. "You kept walking." "That's all I asked." The rest of the squad exchanged glances. They didn't just see her as a skilled shooter anymore. They saw her as a leader. Someone who refused to leave anyone behind. One evening, as the recruits gathered in the rec hall, the base intercom crackled to life. "Attention. Tomorrow morning, live range combat assessment. This will determine deployment readiness. Prepare your gear and rest well." A hush fell over the room. This was it, the test that decided who would move forward to active service. Alyssa packed her gear quietly that night, double-checking her rifle and ammo. She wasn't nervous. She had faced harder things: humiliation, exhaustion, doubt. This was just another test, another chance to refine her skill. When dawn broke, the range was alive with energy. Recruits stood at their assigned lanes, hearts pounding. The scenario was realistic, a simulated battlefield with moving targets, smoke grenades, and limited ammunition. Alyssa crouched low, scanning the field as the siren blared. Her mind narrowed into focus, every sound, every movement clear. Crack, target down. Crack, another. She moved seamlessly between cover, reading the terrain, anticipating the next threat before it appeared. By the time the final whistle blew, her magazine was empty, her breathing steady. When the scores were tallied, she ranked first again by a wide margin. Sergeant Lewis approached, clipboard in hand, eyes glinting with pride. "Grant," he said, "you've done it again. You're officially deployment ready." The rest of the platoon erupted in cheers and claps on the back. Jenkins let out a low whistle. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a legend in the making." Alyssa smiled, modest as always. "I just did my job," she said softly. Lewis shook his head. "No, Grant, you did more than that. You changed this unit." That evening, the platoon gathered outside under the stars, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The bond they'd forged through struggle and respect was unbreakable now. Alyssa sat beside the fire, watching the flames dance. Lopez tossed her a canteen. "You ever think you'd come this far?" he asked. She thought for a long moment before answering. "Not really," she said. "But I knew I'd never stop trying." Jenkins chuckled. "Well, you showed us all what trying really means." The group fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that exists only among those who've endured something together. Above them, the night sky stretched endlessly, a quiet reminder of how small they were, yet how far they'd come. When Sergeant Lewis passed by, he stopped briefly beside Alyssa. "You know," he said, "respect isn't something you demand. It's something you build, brick by brick. You've built it the right way." Alyssa looked up at him, her expression calm but warm. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you know." He nodded, then walked away, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. As the fire crackled and the sounds of quiet laughter filled the night, Alyssa realized something she hadn't before. Respect wasn't just earned through perfect shots or flawless drills. It was earned through integrity, through showing up, through never quitting when others did. She had entered Fort Benning as the recruit no one believed in. Now she was the soldier everyone wanted on their side. And this feeling of belonging, of recognition built through perseverance, was more rewarding than any medal could ever be. The cargo plane shuddered as it descended into the heart of Afghanistan, its engines roaring over the jagged mountains below. Inside, soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder, faces grim, rifles clutched tight. The smell of dust and machine oil hung in the air. Alyssa Grant sat among them, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the horizon through a small window. It had been 6 months since Fort Benning. Training was over. This was the real thing. When the wheels hit the tarmac, a jolt ran through the fuselage. The soldiers braced themselves, and then, as the ramp lowered, a rush of desert heat blasted through the cabin. Sand swirled around them like smoke. The world beyond was loud in bright vehicles rumbling, orders being shouted, rotors spinning in the distance. Alyssa stepped out, her boots meeting foreign soil for the first time. Ahead lay Forward Operating Base, Sterling, a cluster of tan tents, metal outposts, and armed guards scanning the horizon. The war here was quiet, unpredictable, and merciless. "Welcome to Sterling," a voice called. Sergeant First Class Morales, a tall, sunburned veteran, stood waiting. "Hope you're ready. Around here, you learn fast or not at all." Alyssa nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." He looked her over, eyes pausing on the rifle slung across her shoulder. "You're Grant, right? The sharpshooter from Benning?" "Yes, Sergeant," she said again. A smirk tugged at his lips. "Good. We could use a steady hand out here." That first week was chaos-long patrols, harsh winds, sleepless nights. The camp sat on the edge of hostile territory, where danger came without warning. Alyssa adapted quickly. She learned to move silently through the dust, to scan rooftops and doorways for signs of movement, to read the stillness of the desert like a language. Most of her unit was made up of men who'd seen combat before, grizzled, scarred, wary. They didn't talk much. But slowly, as missions passed, Alyssa earned their trust the same way she always had, through quiet precision. On one patrol, as the unit moved through a small Afghan village, the tension was palpable. The streets were eerily empty, the silence too heavy. Morales raised a fist, signaling for a halt. "Something's off," he muttered. Alyssa crouched low, eyes scanning. The rooftops were bare, the windows dark except for one. A flicker. A glint of metal. "Sniper!" She shouted, diving for cover. Before Morales could react, she was already in firing position. One breath. One squeeze. Crack. The glint disappeared. A moment later, the unit advanced cautiously. On the rooftop, they found the body of a hidden gunman, his weapon still aimed at where they had been standing seconds before. Morales exhaled, shaking his head. "Grant, you just saved my life." She nodded, calm. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." But the look in his eyes said it all. Respect, once again, had been earned not in words, but in action. Weeks turned into months. The routine of patrol, watch, and engagement became second nature. Yet no one ever grew comfortable, not here, where death hid behind every corner. Alyssa spent most of her nights on overwatch duty, lying prone behind her scope, eyes fixed on the darkness. The desert nights were cold, silent, endless. Her radio crackled one evening. "Grant, report. All clear on Sector 2. She whispered back. "Copy that. Stay sharp." She adjusted her scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Her breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythm of her heartbeat. It reminded her of the range back home, the calm before the shot. Except now, every bullet meant life or death. As dawn crept over the mountains, her shift ended. Morales walked up behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You don't sleep, do you?" She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing the metal. "Not when others are counting on me." He chuckled softly. "You've got that quiet fire, Grant. The kind that keeps people alive." She didn't respond, just stared out at the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, the enemy was watching too. One night, everything changed. It started with a faint hum of sound that didn't belong. Alyssa, on late watch again, froze. Her scope swept the ridge line. Then she saw it a flash of light, followed by the faint outline of movement. Her blood ran cold. "Incoming!" She shouted into the radio. A second later, the first explosion hit. The ground erupted, throwing her backward. Sirens blared across the base as soldiers scrambled for cover. Mortar shells screamed through the air, lighting the desert sky in violent bursts of orange. "Grant, get to the tower," Morales ordered over the comms. She grabbed her rifle, sprinting through the chaos. The base was in full attack, shrapnel flying, bullets cutting through the air. Reaching the tower, she climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time. From the top, she could see them enemy combatants emerging from the darkness, advancing fast. Her hands moved automatically. She set her rifle on the railing, chambered around, and steadied her aim. Crack, one down, crack, another. Her shots came fast and flawless, each one protecting her team below. Morales's voice shouted over the comms. "Grant, you've got the north covered?" "Affirmative, Sergeant." "Then keep it that way." She did. For hours, the battle raged. The night was alive with gunfire, smoke, and chaos. But through it all, Alyssa stayed calm. Focused, she didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Every bullet found its mark. When the dust finally settled and the enemy retreated, the base lay battered but standing. Dozens of lives had been saved because of her. Morales climbed the tower, his uniform torn, face streaked with soot. "You didn't miss a single one," he said, staring at the scorched battlefield. Alyssa lowered her rifle slowly, her hands trembling from adrenaline. "Did we lose anyone?" "Not one," he said. Then softer, "Because of you." She didn't smile. She just nodded, staring out into the pale light of dawn. The next day, word spread through the base like wildfire. Grant held the tower. She picked them off one by one. Didn't even blink. To the others, it was legend. To Alyssa, it was survival. Later, as she sat cleaning her rifle, Jenkins, now a corporal, stationed at the same base, walked in, shaking his head with a grin. "You really don't miss, do you?" Alyssa chuckled softly. "Not if I can help it." He sat across from her. "You know, back at Benning, we thought you were just trying to prove us wrong." "I was proving something," she said, running the cloth down the barrel. "Just not to you." Jenkins smiled faintly. "Well, you proved it to all of us anyway." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Morales called her to his tent. He handed her a letter, her first commendation for valor in combat. "You earned this," he said. "And if it were up to me, you'd get 10 more. Alyssa held the envelope, the weight of it almost surreal. "Thank you, Sergeant." He looked at her for a long moment. "You remind me of the old soldiers," he said. "The ones who didn't fight for glory, just for each other." She nodded quietly. "That's the only reason worth fighting for." As she stepped outside, the desert wind brushed against her face, warm and dry. She looked up at the stars, bright, endless, unflinching. Somewhere in that vast sky, she thought of her grandfather's words again. Patience steadies the shot. And she realized patience had done more than steady her aim. It had forged her into something unbreakable. Alyssa Grant, the woman they once laughed at, had become the soldier everyone counted on. The hum of the fluorescent lights echoed softly through the Fort Benning training hall. a familiar sound that carried with it the ghosts of countless recruits who had passed through its doors. Elisa Grant walked through the corridors, her boots striking the polished floor with quiet authority. Her uniform was crisp, insignia shining, rifle meticulously maintained at her side. The whispers of the past months still lingered in her mind, the laughter, the doubts, the sleepless nights, but now they were distant echoes, reminders of how far she had come. She paused outside the main training range. Beyond the glass, recruits were practicing marksmanship drills, rifles snapping against targets with the sharp reports that once intimidated her. But this time, she wasn't just a participant. She was a guide, a symbol, a mentor. A young recruit, barely out of high school, raised his eyes toward her. His stance was uncertain, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his grip. Elisa approached him silently, kneeling beside the rifle to check his positioning. "You're gripping too tight," she said softly. "Relax your fingers. The rifle should feel like an extension of your arm, not a weight dragging you down." He nodded, following her instructions carefully. She adjusted his cheek placement, his elbow angle, and even coached his breathing. The first shot hit slightly off-center, but the second landed dead on. "Better," Elisa said, standing straight. "Remember, patience steadies the shot." The boy grinned, a mixture of relief and pride lighting his face. Elisa smiled faintly. This was why she endured, why she trained relentlessly, not for accolades, not for glory, but to shape the next generation. Later that afternoon, the training hall was buzzing with recruits and instructors. Elisa's name had become legend here. Whispers of her feats spread like wildfire. "Did you hear about Grant?" Someone asked. "She didn't miss a single target during qualification. Not one. And in Afghanistan?" Another added. "She held a tower against hostile forces. Saved lives." Elisa overheard the conversations with a quiet smile. She didn't need to be the subject of gossip. Her deeds spoke louder than any words. But she allowed the story to linger. She wanted them to know that skill, patience, and integrity mattered more than arrogance or bravado. As she walked through the hall, Sergeant Lewis approached her, now a mentor and friend rather than simply an instructor. He nodded, approval clear in his eyes. "Grant," he said, voice steady, "you've done more than earn respect. You've changed the way this unit sees itself." Elisa glanced at him, modest. "I just did what I had to do, sir." "Exactly," he said. "And that's why they remember you." In the weeks that followed, Elisa was assigned to lead a small squad of recruits through advanced marksmanship and tactical drills. She approached the work with the same meticulous attention that had earned her first recognition years ago. Each exercise was designed not only to test skill, but to teach discipline, patience, and focus, the lessons she had learned the hard way. During one exercise, the squad was tasked with navigating a simulated urban environment. The targets were moving, the obstacles were unpredictable, and time was limited. Elisa led them silently, communicating only with hand signals and subtle gestures. The recruits followed her without question, moving like a single, cohesive unit. When the final target fell, Sergeant Lewis raised his voice above the clamor. "Squad completion, flawless. Grant's leadership is evident." The recruits exchanged glances, awe in their eyes. For many, this was their first encounter with a mentor who demonstrated not only skill, but unshakable calm under pressure. Elisa had become the standard, a model for excellence. One evening, after a long day of drills, Elisa sat quietly in the empty range hall. She cleaned her rifle methodically, the rhythmic motion of her hands grounding her thoughts. The quiet gave her time to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the first day at Fort Benning, the laughter, the ridicule, a sense of being an outsider. She remembered the hours of training in solitude, the bruises, the exhaustion, and the self-doubt. Every moment had built her into the soldier she had become. Every failure had taught her patience. Every insult had strengthened her resolve. And now, here she was not just surviving, but shaping the future. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A young female recruit entered hesitantly, eyes wide. "Ma'am?" she asked. "Yes?" Elisa replied, setting down her cloth. I wanted to thank you," the recruit said quietly. You inspire me. I used to think I couldn't do it. But watching you, seeing how calm and precise you are, it makes me believe I can." Elisa's expression softened. She had never sought admiration, yet this acknowledgment touched something deep inside. "Good," she said simply. "Believe it. That's where it all starts." The recruit nodded and left, and Elisa returned to her rifle, a sense of purpose settling over her. Word of her accomplishments reached beyond the walls of the base. New recruits were told tales of the woman who never missed, who had held a tower against overwhelming odds, who transformed a unit with quiet competence and steady leadership. She became more than a name. She became a symbol. During orientation sessions, instructors would tell incoming soldiers, "Follow her example. Watch her, learn from her, and remember that precision, patience, and courage matter more than bravado." Elisa never sought the spotlight, but it found her nonetheless. Her story became a living lesson in resilience, a testament to what could be achieved when determination met skill. Even Sergeant Lewis, now a veteran mentor himself, found himself using her example when teaching others. "Grant," he would say, "remember her. She proves that focus beats fear and discipline beats doubt every time." Years passed, and Elisa's legacy grew. She trained dozens of recruits, each one carrying a piece of her lessons into their own service. The new soldiers spoke her name with respect, recounting the story of the recruit who had once been laughed at, who then hit every target without hesitation, and who became a soldier capable of holding lives in her hands and never faltering. She returned occasionally to Fort Benning, walking the same ranges where her journey began. She could feel the echoes of her younger self, the doubts, the laughter, the fear, and she smiled, knowing that every moment had been a step toward something far greater than herself. One evening, standing on the edge of the range, she looked across the targets. The wind rustled the trees, carrying the scent of gunpowder and earth. Somewhere out there, a new recruit was learning the lessons she had once struggled to grasp. And she knew quietly that the chain of mentorship would continue. Because in the end, it wasn't about the targets. It wasn't about the medals or the accolades. It was about the legacy of skill, patience, and courage. It was about proving to herself and to everyone else that determination could turn doubt into respect, that precision could turn fear into confidence, and that a soldier who believed in herself could inspire generations to come. Elisa Grant, the woman they once laughed at, had become a legend, and her story would endure long after the echoes of gunfire faded into history.